You're listening to Tarazi Tuesdays with the Bible as Literature.
Hi, this is Father Mark Boulos, and you are listening to Tarazi Tuesdays with the Bible as Literature podcast. Imagine a monster whose primary interest is to embrace philosophy and then power. Roman power, Greco-Roman power, and Greek philosophy, in other words, human power. Origen. You know what he loved. The ugliest, most vile, sinister, and self-serving sin, zealously and passionately preached by everyone I know. The worship of state, ethnicity, family, religion, but especially philosophy. For example, your blood-soaked liberal values embedded in your Greekdom. Profoundly and inexorably disgusting. Likewise, the human clan, the family, the irredeemable evil character that the gospel itself presents as the archenemy of Jesus Christ. Peter, equally revolting and unworthy of God. Origen, who learned Hebrew not to teach Scripture, but to increase his importance in order to undermine the rabbis. Alexandria, self-involved academics and money-grubbing politicians. A marriage made in hell. Don't believe me? Ask your kids. All you need, Father Paul thunders, is to read Galatians chapter 2 15 times in a row. As if. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. I am honored to introduce Father Paul on the Bible as Literature podcast, Tarazi Tuesdays.
So to go back to my thesis, if you have questions, you don't have to have it now, but later we ask and we detail, we have to check on dates and so on. But very clearly, and the intro is very interesting because it speaks about the translation happening, at Alexandria at the time of Ptolemy. It parallels this letter of Aristeas, and yet it is there that the author says one has always to remember that you go back to the Hebrew. After having mentioned, that this prologue is chiastic, you have A, B, A prime, is mentioned in the B after the A, where we have a reference to the tripartite, meaning the prophets, which in the Hebrew means not only Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12, but also Joshua through 2 Kings, which means these books are prophetic books because in them you have a critique of kingship and of the people. And as I pointed in my books also, you have an express reference by name to Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Jonah. So, from my perspective, it is no joke. And this book of Sirach, Wisdom of Solomon, was forced by the followers of the original masters because I'm not saying that everything happened in 2 years in Mesopotamia. By, I'm using my words, forcing its inclusion. And it was not that impossible when their opponents had introduced other books. Remember Maccabees and so on, and Enoch. So they introduced this as a time bomb. Why I say time bomb? Because this book is not present in the Hebrew canon. It is in the Septuagint canon, but it is there. And Magisterion is one of the longest books, if not the longest books. And again, with a pointer to its predecessors, which are in both canons, which means the original Hebrew and the Septuagint, which is the Wisdom of Solomon and then Ecclesiastes. The name is very interesting. I checked on that. It is, and this is where the Latin took it from. To continue covering my notes here, again, the two main opponents are philosophy and then power, which is human power, the state, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. The first one, philosophy, is embedded in Greekdom. This is what Philo fell for. And the second one, the power, is embedded in Rome. And I said this so many times about the Romans and so on, to which Herod and Sadducees fell. Now, in Alexandria, to come back to that, that's very important. It's the head of the asp. And the top examples are Athanasius and Cyril, very dangerous. But the Copts are enamored with both. What can we do? Copts meaning non-Chalcedonian, which means the Chalcedonians and the non-Chalcedonians try to say, each one, that they are the followers of Alexandria, in my terminology. Now, Alexandria combined both philosophy and power, Roman power, Greco-Roman power, and Greek philosophy. Again, revisiting Alexandria, because these are my bullets, you have Plotinus influencing both Philo and Origen. The latter learned Hebrew and published his tetrapla and hexapla to undermine the authority of his counterparts, the rabbis. I mean, even scholars say that Origen learned Hebrew to try to prove the rabbis wrong. But by doing so, he hijacked the Hebrew text. He gives lip service to the fact that he knew Hebrew, but de facto his reference was the Greek from his writings, obviously. He throws here and there, I mean, it's puff in the eyes of the people. To back his point. The serious one, interestingly, in this matter, and he is very important for me because he is the predecessor of Mitchell Dahoud, was Jerome. Who translated his Vulgate from the Hebrew, and he was criticized by his counterpart, Augustine, who believed that the Septuagint was inspired. That's why the Catholics here and the Orthodox are two butts in the same underwear. I remember one of the scholars in my time read, the push from Olma in the Hebrew of Isaiah 7 to Parthenos in Greek was an inspired push. In other words, the translation was still creative. I can see your eyes, Father Tim, so I'm assuming that you're rolling them. But again, you see how hard it is to go against the flow. So it's my pride to be in the camp of Jerome and Mitchell Dahoud. The Latin Old Testament is the canon of the Septuagint. In other words, when Jerome translated the original Hebrew to Latin, obviously he had only the Hebrew canon. But in the actual Bible of the West are added the books that are not in the Hebrew canon, but are in the Septuagint and found in the previous translation, which is the Old Latin. I'm pointing this out to show how difficult it is to dissociate oneself from whatever is called the earlier tradition. But the earlier tradition, or the tradition of the followers, of the opponents. Let me jump to the New Testament before I forget. That's why the New Testament, I'm convinced of that. This is perhaps novel to your ears, because I gave it an extra thought, that the one school of the New Testament included books under the name of Paul's opponents, James, John, and Peter. Jude is the brother of James, which is Judah. Actually, in the Greek, by the way, I want you to note that. There is no Jude, there is Judah. But you see how people make up, they historicize. In the Greek, it is Iuda, Iudas. By forcing them, by make it sound that these people are saying the same thing as Paul. And the classic is the ending of 2 Peter that refers to the letters of our brother Paul, who are as scripture is. The original is very clear. So this school, and it's interesting that their hero is from the outside, from Tarsus, which is interestingly close to Mesopotamia. In other words, Paul was the factual disciple of Ezekiel. In other words, he defended the Ezekielian school teaching and put everything together, and again ended the story with the book of Revelation, which is, there is nothing beyond Scripture. So although there was a battle for the canon of the Old Testament, in the New Testament you don't find this until later, people saying by adding, the Roman Catholics had their thesis to defend the deuterocanonical books of the Old Testament as part of the Bible by referring to deuterocanonical books in the New Testament. James, John, Peter, and possibly the two letters to Timothy and so on. You could see they are playing on this issue to tell you. But de facto, we know that the canon is integral. And I have a proof of that. Marcion was, if you like, a pro-Pauline, his extreme attitude that all the Paul's letters are the reference. And the corollary was he was uneasy with the four Gospels, and he combined them into one. So these data, which are historical, that's why my reference to Philo and the Sadducees and Herod and Josephus are very important, but I read them differently than the classic scholarship. There was a debate, a fight. All you need to know is to read 15 times in a row Galatians chapter 2. And Peter is presented as condemned. So it's no joke.
The Bible as Literature is a production of the Ephesus School Network.